In said raids, the Canadians gorged their bayonets with blood and made good use of improvised melee weapons, paying little attention to attempts at surrender and skewering bandaged and unarmed men just the same as men on their feet with rifles.
Alright y'all, welcome back to Combat Arms channel. Alright, so we're doing an old recommendation today. Now I'm glad I'm finally able to hit up this video. So this is a video, Canadians change when they hear the word war. Now you guys recommended this a bunch. I think when I did the first reaction to the Canadian military about the BMQ, you guys were recommending it a lot. And then when I did a video about the Royal Canadian Mounted Police, and you guys recommended it a bunch there. So I'm glad I'm finally able to hit it up. I did put it on my list, but I've been seeing it show up more and more, so I definitely want to do a reaction to it. I've not seen it at all. I've seen maybe like 10 seconds just to sort of get a feel for the video, but it seems like a pretty high quality video. It's from the YouTube channel The Front. I'm not really familiar with their stuff, but I guess this will give us a good idea of the sort of content they produce. But it seems very awesome so far. And I know you guys have been recommending this a lot to me because you really want me to understand how Canadians do change when they hear the word war, when they have to go to war. So I'm not really too sure about the Canadian military background or how much they've been involved with. I know, of course, they've been in Afghanistan. During World War II, they were a part of the Allies. But I think outside of that, I don't really know too much about the Canadian military. I've only worked with them very briefly in Romania, and we didn't really work side by side. So I didn't really get a good feel for them. I don't even know what unit it was, to be honest. So I'm not really too sure or too savvy on the Canadian military. So this will give me a good background as to what the Canadian military might have done. And yeah, just their overall mindset. So it'd be very cool to check out. Again, you guys might be able to see underneath the video, there's some merch sort of popping up now. I do have the merch on Redbubble, but I also have the merch on Teespring. So if you guys have any preference, you can go and check that out. Feel free to buy some channel merch. I have some stuff. So I have some stickers right here. And then I also have some shirts as well that I've ordered. So I like Redbubble. Teespring is another awesome option. I'm just not as familiar with their products. But if you guys want to buy some merch, that'll be down in the video description and also underneath the video. And of course, Armistice Day was a few days ago, so I hope you guys were able to take that and do some remembrance if you had any family or friends that served during World War I. Hopefully you guys had a good holiday and were able to appreciate it. But yeah, let us get into this video. I know the Canadians celebrates, they might call it just Remembrance Day, but I know they celebrate it. So again, if I have any Canadians out there, I hope you guys were able to enjoy that holiday. But let us get into this video and see how Canadians change when they hear the word war.
Sorry, not sorry. While Canadians are nowadays subject to the stereotype of hockey-loving, maple syrup-chugging, overly polite potheads, their wartime stereotypes in the First and Second World Wars had their enemies trembling in their boots and making a hot mess in their trousers. It's as if, when the Canadians hear the word war, their insatiable desire for maple syrup and Canadian beer turns into an insatiable desire for blood. In saying that, however, they didn't always rush enemy positions with bayonets, meat cleavers, and spiked clubs, but were some of the most well-trained and formidable soldiers on any front in any war. In this video, we're going to explore Canadian wartime reputation, keeping our scope focused on World War II and the heroic feats of individual Canadian soldiers therein.
Okay, so I kind of like how he's talking about the reputation of war, because that's not really something that people like to focus on so much, because it gets very, very touchy when you talk about certain conflicts or even specific years in certain conflicts. So yeah, it's kind of interesting that he's bringing up the reputation. Again, we don't really, or at least I don't know too much about the Canadian military or their history as far as what they've been involved in, but talking about the reputation is a good starting point, because you can sort of see how they operated, what their mindset was, and just overall how they were in relation to the enemy or how they treated them. So yeah, that's a good starting point. I'm glad he's actually talking about that reputation. Okay. Solid editing. Wow, that puts my editing to shame.
To get the puck sliding, let's move our scope quickly to the First World War, in which the Canadians laid the groundwork for their reputation as shock troopers. Mostly, the troops of the Canadian Corps were known for their savage raids on enemy trenches and their unwritten take no prisoner and kill the wounded policies. Locked in a stalemate in opposing trenches, the Canadians devised all manner of strategies and weaponry to flip the chessboard upside down and clean up the enemy pieces. Cutting through barbed wire, they crept upon them in the cover of night with painted faces, launching either savage, unforeshadowed raids or perking up their ears and eavesdropping on enemy plans. In said raids, the Canadians gorged their bayonets with blood and made good use of improvised melee weapons, paying little attention to attempts at surrender and skewering bandaged and unarmed men just the same as men on their feet with rifles.
Alright. Yeah, so again, we're talking about the reputation and we're getting a lot of information already about the Canadian military. Of course, World War I was a very weird war, and this is when like really modern tactics were actually starting to get implemented and people were starting to do things that you didn't see in war traditionally. So moving up to the trenches and having these like having this trench warfare is just a completely different mindset from what people were really used to with these modern weapons. So of course you have like the shock and awe, because they're talking about them being shock troopers. They had the shock and awe, painting their faces, getting that reconnaissance, like doing that eavesdropping like they were saying, and then going in there and just assaulting as violently as possible. So you will get a reputation of just being extremely scary when you have people who have painted faces coming in with all these close quarter combat weapons and just, brutalizing everyone. You're going to get a reputation, whether it be good or bad. It's probably going to have an effect in your favor if you have that sort of violence. And I feel bad saying, but I didn't really know Canada's involvement in World War I too much, so it's good to learn some stuff.
They even concocted an alchemist's shelf of homebrew explosives, like pipe bombs and jam jars loaded with nails and gunpowder. I think it's a safe bet to say that at least one grenade is made with a maple syrup jar. There are also tales of Canadian troops
this goes
using
back to the
temporary
maple syrup,
truces, like on Christmas Day, as a chance to catch their enemy with his stockings on, sending him grenades instead of Christmas ham, and bullets through the brain instead of season's greetings.
Good grief.
Now, it could be argued that Canadians were acting out of vengeance, but couldn't that argument be used to justify most atrocities in most wars?
Yeah,
Canadian Lieutenant R.C. Germain's letter home to his parents makes the revenge excuse about as clear as the sap from a freshly tapped maple tree.
Oh my gosh.
After losing half of my company there, we rushed them, and they had the nerve to throw up their hands and cry "Camarade." All the camarade they got was a foot of cold steel, while I blew their brains out with my revolver.
Alright.
Despite being a little stab happy with enemy soldiers, Canadian troops were known for being quite, as we contemporary folk have come to expect, polite to civilian populations. Before we have a look at Canadian reputation in World War II and some of its stories, it might pay to know about Canada's involvement in the war. Canada waited until the 10th of September 1939 to declare war on Germany because it didn't want to follow Britain like a Commonwealth sheep. It took Canada until the 11th of June 1940 to declare war on Italy and the 7th of December 1941 to declare it on Japan. Overall, about 10% of Canada's population fought for her and the Allies. This amounted to around 1,100,000 Canadians serving in the Canadian Army, the Royal Canadian Navy, and the Royal Canadian
That's a
Air
lot of
Force.
people.
Of this 1,100,000, the majority were volunteers.
Okay, wow, that's actually a huge distinction that he did right there. So the majority were volunteers. I'm not sure if they actually had like a draft or anything, like we saw in the U.S. But yeah, I mean, 1,100,000 people going, and most of them being volunteers. It's pretty solid. It goes to show the mindset that they actually had, or the Canadian people actually had, as far as going into World War II, because they were probably able to see how it was affecting other people, and that's probably why a lot of them were motivated to go and serve. But yeah, 10% of the population doesn't seem like much, but when you're talking about 1,100,000 people and most of them being volunteers, that definitely makes a huge distinction.
Canadians fought in almost every theatre of World War II, notably in the defence of the United Kingdom, the Battle of Hong Kong, the Dieppe Raid, the invasions of Sicily and Italy, the Normandy landings and the liberation of France, and the liberation of Belgium and the Netherlands. The Canadian Navy escorted Allied ships across the Atlantic and maintained a high presence in the Pacific Ocean, and pilots from the Canadian Air Force flew under the wing of the British Royal Air Force.
That's pretty cool.
German submarines sunk Canadian naval and merchant vessels in the water of Canada and Newfoundland and attacked the loading pier at Bell Island. And the Japanese also attacked a lighthouse on Vancouver Island, though little else occurred in Canadian waters or on mainland Canada. Of the military operations in which Canadians were involved, their ferocity and inventiveness stood out in the Battle of Ortona, the Normandy landings, and the liberation of Belgium and the Netherlands.
So I like to think I know a decent amount about World War II. I mean, at least a little bit more than what most people know, but honestly, what he's saying right now, a lot of it does not ring a bell. As far as the liberation of Belgium and the Netherlands, I know pretty much nothing about that. I mean, I know where they are geographically, and I can sort of assume the course of events for some of the things, but yeah, that entire region, like with the Belgium, Netherlands, I mean, even Denmark, Sweden, I don't really know a whole lot about their involvement in World War II. So, I mean, it's nice to find some bits and pieces, but I think I really need to do a little bit more research about it. But it's nice to sort of hear the Canadian perspective and how they were sort of, doing all these different operations that I was completely clueless about.
Through the medieval streets of Ortona, Italy, the Canadians and Germans engaged in brutal room-to-room, hand-to-hand fighting, with the Germans eventually having to withdraw. Here, the Canadians coined the tactic mouse holding, which is basically blowing holes in buildings to allow the passage of infantry rather than running into enemy bullets in the open.
Right, okay.
In the D-Day landings, the Canadians landed on Juno Beach, the second most resisted beachhead besides Omaha. The Canadians penetrated further inland than anyone else, coming up against some of the strongest units in the German military.
Badasses.
In Belgium and the Netherlands, the Canadians spent thousands and thousands of Canadian lives to drive the Germans back and get food to the starving civilian populations.
Wow.
They even shared rations with civilians and gave them blankets. Some of the most intense combat here was in the Battle of Scheldt, where the Allies fought through flooded terrain against stiff German defenses for about a month. This battle alone cost the Canadians more than 6,000 casualties. This latter triumph, particularly the part about getting food to the starving civilians, is certainly keeping with Canadian tendencies in the First World War, though the following atrocity paints a bit of a different picture.
Okay.
Canadian Lieutenant Colonel Frederick E. Wiggle was shot dead on approach to the town of Friseute, Germany, and a rumor spread that it was a civilian sniper from that town who shot him. Back on that revenge train, the Canadians burnt down the entire town, apparently moving its citizens onward before setting their homes on fire.
Okay,
it was discovered later that Wiggle was shot by German soldiers. Now, the intent of...
Yeah, again, you will see these sort of one-off scenarios where something bad happens and, the units or whatever just responds in a way that isn't keeping with the rest of what you've seen from that particular military. But I mean, we see that all the time in several conflicts, like World War I, World War II, the Vietnam War. I'm sure there's a bunch of that in the Korean War as well. So yeah, you sort of see this all the time, and you can't really attribute the entire military just based off of like these one things. It's definitely important to know, definitely important to study and find out, what sort of cause, the whole cause and effect of everything. But yeah, I mean, it's something to keep in mind, but you shouldn't judge the entire military off of it, generally speaking. But we were able to see that they were helping the civilian populace out as far as giving them blankets and rations and all that good stuff, which is awesome to see. Again, winning the hearts and minds is a big thing. And some people don't even do it for like the whole political favor. Sometimes you'll try and win the hearts and minds just to get like political favor. But a lot of times it's just people trying to be people and humans helping other humans out. So it's cool to see that sort of side of it. But I did not know that they lost that many people, in Belgium and in the Netherlands. So it's awesome to hear about it. It's cool to finally learn up on that. Because again, I was completely clueless about their involvement there.
Emphasizing Canadian brutality in World War I and mentioning the Friseute incident is not to take away from Canadian bravery in either world conflict. Like I said before, Canadians were some of the most well-trained and formidable soldiers on any front in any war. And I think the best way to communicate that is to share some stories involving some of the most heroic Canadian soldiers in World War II.
Let's do it.
On the 14th of December 1943, Canadian Captain Paul Triquet and his company, supported by an armoured squadron, tried to cross the gully and take the Casa Berardi, a hamlet on the Orto Orsona lateral, Italy.
Okay.
Under heavy machine gun and mortar fire, Triquet ran around organising and inspiring what remained of his men, saying, "There are enemy in front of us, behind us, and on our flanks. There is only one safe place. That is on the objective," before charging forward and breaking through the enemy line. Triquet's company and the supporting tank squadron pushed right up to the edge of Casa Berardi, where he set up defenses and fought off a tank-supported German counterattack with whatever weapons he could find. He held the defensive parameter against superior numbers until the rest of the battalion came in and relieved the company. Triquet's utter disregard of danger, his cheerfulness and tireless devotion inspired his men, and his tactical skill and leadership facilitated the capture at a vital point on the Ortona Orsona lateral.
So in the U.S. Marines, I heard that a couple times. In the infantry, you'll hear all these motivational things and such. But I heard several times where they were saying the safest place to be, when things start kicking off, is going to be the objective. And it sounds weird and sort of counterintuitive, but it makes sense, generally speaking, and I can understand the mindset behind it. So I kind of wonder if that specific phrase or that sort of mindset came from this specific individual. So that's kind of cool to think about if that is the case, because there are a lot of quotes you hear and a lot of phrases you'll hear and you don't really understand the origin, or people don't really know the origin. So I don't know, that I could possibly attribute that to him just saying that in Italy. So I mean, that's kind of cool to think about. It's cool to sort of correlate these things from different militaries as far as like famous quotes to motivate a U.S. Marine infantry platoon in the year 2016 to something that this Canadian did in Italy during World War II. It's cool to think about.
On the 18th of August 1944, Canadian Major David Vivian Currie was in command of a force of tanks, self-propelled anti-tank guns and infantry. His task was to block an escape route from the Falaise pocket in the village of Saint-Lambert-sur-Diver, Normandy. Currie went in alone to scout German defences and to free the crew of 2 Allied tanks which were previously disabled. Under heavy mortar fire, he succeeded. The Germans then kept throwing counterattacks at Currie and his men until on the 20th, one final German counterattack was thwarted by Currie, costing the Germans some 2,900 casualties.
Holy cow.
Throughout these 3 days of intense combat, Currie displayed gallant conduct and a contempt of danger and collected and inspired his men. One of his officers said, "We knew at one stage that it was going to be a fight to the finish. But he was so cool about it, it was impossible for us to get excited." Over the 3 days, Currie barely got an hour's sleep, and when it was over, he fell asleep standing and then crashed to the ground. Currie's courage and devotion to duty had a far-reaching effect on the successful outcome of the battle.
Dude, that goes to show, like, if you're like a solid leader and you can inspire people a certain way, then it's going to take it pretty far. But, dude, a counterattack and they took down like over 2,000 people, like, being in the infantry, you sort of train for like small counterattacks, like maybe a platoon, possibly a company, but having over 2,000 people, that's a very serious operation. I mean, of course, we see that all the time during like World War II, where these huge offenses, but attributing like an entire defense to one person's leadership kind of just goes to show how much of a solid leader they were and how many people they were able to actually influence with all that. So, I mean, yeah, it's awesome to hear these stories and awesome to see these like specific individuals and how effective they were at inspiring these people. And I mean, it goes to show back in World War II, yeah, you wouldn't expect this sort of stuff to happen because everyone has modern technology. It might just come down to technology versus technology. But if you have some solid leaders, then you can really turn the tide.
French-Canadian Corporal Leo Major was also in Normandy, where he captured a German armoured vehicle which held secret codes and lost an eye to a phosphorus grenade. He stayed in service, saying that he looked like a pirate. However, it wasn't in Normandy where Leo earned his first Distinguished Conduct Medal, but in the Netherlands in 1945. Actually, before we go there, Leo single-handedly captured 93 Germans in the Battle of Scheldt. When out on a solo reconnaissance mission in 1944, he escorted all 93 of them back to his camp, where he would not accept a DCM because he considered the person awarding it to him to be incompetent. Back to 1945 and the real DCM. After breaking his back, ribs, and both ankles when the car he was in was hit by a landmine, Leo went on a recon mission with a friend in the city of Zwolle. His friend was killed, so Major continued alone, capturing a German soldier, making the soldier take him to his officer, who was in a bar, and then telling that German officer that the Canadian artillery was going to shell and kill them all. Leo then ran through the city, firing his gun and lobbing grenades, fooling the Germans into thinking the Canadian army was invading. All through the night, Major brought captured German troops back to his camp, resting in civilian houses whenever he needed to catch his breath. He then set a Gestapo HQ on fire and assaulted a Nazi SS HQ before meeting with members of the Dutch resistance and informing them that he had liberated the entire city by himself. I've got to say, that last one is pure insanity. What an absolute machine. Overall, based on the available evidence at least, I think Canadians in World War II abandoned their unofficial take no prisoner and kill the wounded policies of World War I. Obviously, this is a generalization, and the Vliesuyte incident certainly demonstrates that they were at least capable of unjust violence, though there is no comparing the deeds of the Canadians to, say, the Germans, the Japanese, and the Soviets. As evinced by the stories of Paul Triquet, David Curry, and Leo Major, Canadian courage and formidability was in no short supply, and I believe modern-day Canadians should be proud of how the Canadian military cleaned up their act after World War I and made such a brave and significant contribution to an Allied victory in the Second World War.
Oh yeah.
Anyways, guys, make sure you let me know your thoughts on Canada and some of the super soldiers we...
Okay, awesome video. So, yeah, that was made by The Front. He's almost at 200,000 subscribers, so definitely feel free to go over to his channel and show him some love. Maybe by the time this video comes out, he'll be at 200,000, but if not, definitely show him some love regardless. That was a very awesome video. Some pretty solid research went into it, and of course, it's always fun to sort of hear those maple syrup jokes and everything. But I really do like how he went to talk about how Canada was in World War I and how they had a pretty bad reputation. But then when they moved to World War II, they really regained that reputation. So it's kind of interesting to think about. So you see a lot of countries where they get into a bad rap and they get a bad reputation of just being like warmongers or just being super cruel. And they sort of just run with that, and it doesn't really get any better. But it's sort of cool to compare how Canada was in World War I with, you know, their actions in World War II. Very, very awesome to see. And then he was talking about those specific individuals where, I mean, again, you hear these crazy badass stories of like one person like taking hundreds of people prisoner or what have you. And it's just mind blowing to think about. But you had these people in all these different militaries that were capable of doing that. Because again, in World War II, it did have to boil down to technology sometimes, but you have these people that use this psychological warfare or use their leadership to really change the tide of specific battles or specific operations. And it's really cool to attribute that to one person. So Canada, again, like he was saying, there's no shortness of these badasses or these heroes or these incredible leaders. So very, very cool to hear about. Now, if y'all are in the Canadian military and you know any other stories or any other badasses, or if you have any other videos you'd like me to check out, definitely put those down in the comment section. If you guys are just historians and you know more about Canada than I do, feel free to drop that in the comment section as well. Because again, I don't really know too much, which is why it's awesome to do these YouTube videos. Because you guys send me these awesome recommendations of all these, you know, different videos and these operations and these people, and I get to learn a whole bunch. And I don't know, just from doing like these reaction videos for, I don't know, roughly 8 months now, I've learned a whole lot. So I really do appreciate that. And hopefully you guys have learned a lot watching some of my videos. It's very, very cool to do this sort of community where you have me learning and you have you guys learning off the back end. So very, very cool to hear about. Thank you for sending this amazing recommendation. And hopefully you guys will send some awesome stuff in the future. I'm very confident you guys will, because I have a list full of awesome videos that I still need to check out. So I will continue to work on that. But again, I hope you guys enjoyed this video. Thank you very much for watching. But that is it for this one. So I will see you on the next one.